Weeds are plants that have evolved to thrive in specific agricultural environments. So as long as we use the same practices in the same ways, weeds will continue to be a significant problem. Therefore, our jobs as advisors and farmers is to keep weeds guessing with integrated tactics so that we can cut short their life cycles and stop their evolution. You can break effective weed control into 3 obvious but profound directives. 1. Keep weeds from emerging. 2. Kill the weeds that do emerge. And 3. Control that weed seed bank. So in this lesson, we're going to dive into how to start a growing season off on the right foot by keeping weeds from emerging in the first place. We'll cover 4 strategies: delaying fieldwork, smart planting, crop rotation, and strategic irrigation and nutrient management. Thought of another way, these are some of the ecological approaches to weed control, the cultural controls that are baked into a well-functioning agricultural system. The first strategy is to delay fieldwork and planting for spring-planted row crops like corn and beans. When an organic farmer starts to see their neighbors rolling into the fields, it can be really hard to just sit on your hands and wait. But as one Iowa farmer put it, "When my neighbors are planting, that's when I need to take myself on a little fishing trip to keep my mind off the fact that I want to be out there too." Another Minnesota farmer said, "When the apple trees blossom, that's when it's time to plant corn." That's what my grandpa used to say, and there's a lot of truth to it. So why, when the soil is drying, daytime temps look good, and the calendar says spring, are these organic farmers keeping their planters in the shed? Well, there are a few key reasons that organic farmers will almost universally delay spring planting, typically by 2 to 4 weeks past their conventional neighbors. The biggest reason has to do with temperature. Let's take corn for example, a very commonly planted spring crop. Corn takes about 100 to 120 accumulated growing degree days from planting to emergence. As spring progresses, more growing degree days are accumulated, meaning faster emergence and growth, giving a cash crop a competitive advantage. In a Minnesota experiment, conventional corn planted on April 15th emerged in 25 days. The same corn planted on May 10th emerged in just 9 days. The 50-degree threshold we've all heard about is for conventional corn. Organic, untreated seeds won't have the seed treatments that conventional seeds do, and generally won't perform as well given the disease and fungus pressures that can build up in a cool, wet soil. We'll talk more about diseases and pests in another module. There are other important reasons for delayed planting, from offsetting pollination windows to avoid GMO pollen drift, to allowing for stale seed bedding to reduce pest and disease pressures. We'll cover all of these in other lessons. So the second strategy is smart planting. That means a good seed bed, the right genetics, adjusting seeding rates, and row spacings. Let's spend a couple of minutes talking about the different parts of smart planting. As with any crop within a production system, starting with an ideal seed bed is a good place to begin. This means a consistent seed bed with reasonable aggregate size that's as clean as possible, usually having been cultivated right before planting. Basically, kill weeds early and keep it as clean as possible. As we've already talked about, getting a crop up and growing as fast as possible as it tries to outrun the invading weeds is the key. A good seed bed means good seed to soil contact, which will increase the chances that a crop emerges uniformly and is off to the races. It'll also make cultivation and the all-important soil flow much easier and more effective. More on this in the cultivation lesson. Now I know every farmer knows how to pick the right seed, but what right means in organic is often different, and it's often more complicated than just the highest yielding. Leafy varieties, they're going to canopy more quickly and outcompete the weeds. Varieties with disease resistance for something a farmer has struggled with might be the best way to combat that pressure. And a shorter maturity window might be necessary to let a farmer delay their planting, just to give a couple of examples. Most seed companies that sell organic seed will have an agronomist on staff who know organics and can help you find the right seed for a particular farm. And it's always a good idea to call around. So hopefully we've driven home that organics is not a one-size-fits-all farming system. This means that there are lots of knobs to turn and switches to flip at almost every point in the growing season. Organic farmers are generally kind of tinkerers, fiddling with their systems year after year in pursuit of that optimal performance. The trick is that what's optimal might also be changing every single year. Either way, when it comes to planting, there are lots of adjustments that can be made. Seeding rates and row spacing are just two of the biggest. So as a general rule, organic farmers plant seed at a heavier rate and try to provide more living roots in the soil during the growing season. This helps crops to compete with weeds, as well as to compensate for cultivation blight, or the plants that you'll inevitably lose through mechanical weed control. For instance, a normal soybean seeding rate might be 140,000 seeds an acre. But in an organic no-till system, a farmer might plant as high as 225,000 seeds an acre. One study out in North Carolina found that higher soybean seeding rates reduced weed pressure at 3 out of 5 sites and increased yield at 3 out of 4 sites. The best economic return was found with the highest seeding rate at all of the sites studied. The same effect is true for small grains. Studies from Montana to the prairie provinces found that barley, wheat, and oats all benefited from increased seeding rates in both yield and weed control. A study in Montana found that higher seeding rates in wheat led to a 12% increase in yield, a 20% reduction in wild oat biomass and seed production, and better financial returns overall. These findings are true across conventional and organic agriculture. However, weed control benefits and yield increases are likely more beneficial in an organic setting. To dig deeper, check out this and other studies on the seeding rate effects on weed control linked in the lesson notes. Now, as far as row spacing, generally, the less open, exposed soil, the better. With small grains and forages, planting seeds closer together to limit spacing between the rows helps minimize the habitat for weeds. Some growers shrink their corn space and soybean row spacing to 15 inches to increase canopy and outcompete those weeds, while there are others moving to 60-inch rows to allow for intercropping, maximizing sun exposure, and making cultivation just that much easier. In small grains and forages, many farmers will cross-seed, meaning 2 field passes at 45-degree angles with half the seed going one way and half the other. This leads to denser stands with more consistent carpet of roots keeping the weeds out. So the third strategy we have to keep weeds from emerging is crop rotation, my favorite part of organics. We took a deep dive into crop rotation in that other module and talked about the importance of an effective, diverse crop rotation. It's the basis for a solid fertility program, a financial diversification strategy, and so much more. It's also an organic crop farmer's protection program, helping to control weeds, insects, and disease pressures. I could tell you all about this study done by Dr. Stephen Mirskey at USDA that really drives the importance of rotation for weed control home. But let's just have him tell you.
Sure. Hey, I'm Stephen Mirskey. I'm a research scientist with the Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Research Service located in Beltsville, Maryland. We do a lot of work on developing sustainable and organic cropping systems and how we manage our crops for maximum productivity, increasing the precision and the sustainability of our food systems, while also reducing the environmental footprint of farming as a whole. We have a lot of limited options when it comes to weed control and organic farming. Without a lot of the tools that come in conventional agriculture or organic agriculture, it requires a lot more intensive soil disturbance and tillage and cultivation to manage the weeds. And our single most effective and sustainable strategy for suppressing weeds in an organic system is crop rotation. Diversifying the complexity of our crops so they have different phenologies, not just having a back-to-back summer annuals, but having, winter annual cash crops, having perennials in the system. All of those types of strategies for mixing together crops is what's going to keep those weeds guessing and has sort of the biggest potential impact we can have on weeds over the long term in a cropping system. Through our research in the long-term cropping systems experiment at Beltsville, Maryland, we call it the Farming Systems Project. In that system we have, a long-term project that's been around for 25 plus years. So, as early as 1996. The three main organic systems in there is a 2-year corn soybean rotation, a 3-year corn soybean wheat rotation, and a 6-year corn soybean wheat, 3 years alfalfa. And this is all managed organically. All of the types of inputs that would go into it, from organic amendments to cultivation and intensive tillage. Without question, there is a huge effect on the diversity of the crop rotation on weeds. We see a big reduction in overall population densities. We see big reductions in the overall impacts on yields. And every year we're seeing less weeds in general in these more diversified rotations like the 6-year. And that's because you've got 3 years of time when a lot of those summer annual weeds like Jimson weed and pigweed and foxtail, they can't perform. Right, they're consistently knocked back in an alfalfa rotation where we're mowing and we're harvesting that forage residue for feeding, livestock and such. During that period of time, the weeds cannot produce seeds. If they do emerge, it's not in the most hospitable environment for them to emerge. And so this is a big reduction in the overall seed bank, and we document that both above ground and below ground by measuring the seeds in the soil.
That's a huge deal. It's obviously not rotation alone though, right? By rotating crops and cover crops and doing all of the field work necessary, like your tillage, planting, and harvest at different times each year, the weed's life cycle will be vulnerable to disruption. So the weeds that can survive really well in corn will be vulnerable to disruption in a wheat or alfalfa crop because of the very different timings and competition. Alternating solid-seeded crops with traditional row crops will break weed and pest cycles and keep weeds from evolving those survival strategies. So the lessons of rotation as a weed control strategy are pretty simple. Longer is better, more diverse is better, perennial phases can be key. The last strategy to keep those weeds from emerging is strategically using irrigation and your applications of nutrients. First, irrigation. Many Midwestern farmers will tell you that planting into soil with good subsurface moisture and then having the rain just turn off is about the best you can hope for as far as weed control. It keeps the plant's roots happy but doesn't provide that hit of moisture weeds need at the surface to germinate. This lets the cash crop get a great head start. The goal with irrigation is to mirror this as much as possible. A farmer can use irrigation ahead of planting to get a flush of weeds, field cultivate them out, and use one more irrigation event to create a nice, moist seedbed to plant into. After that, once the field is dry enough for equipment, plant and wait until the crop has put on some growth and is getting thirsty to hit it again. At that point, you'll be ready with the right cultivation tool to get on any weed that emerges. In the West, we might water up all the weed seeds. In the fall, hit them with tillage so that we still maintain that optimal seed bed so that we can get in and plant early and capture all of that spring moisture. So the general advice is to water and fertilize the crop, not the weeds. Adding nitrogen benefits almost everything that's green and growing in a field, not just the crop. Check out these graphics from a 2003 study in wheat and canola. The red lines are the cash crops and the others are the weeds in the system. In both cases, the crop was not the biggest winner. Wild mustard, pigweed, nightshades, and smartweed had even bigger jumps in shoot biomass. All to say, fertilize judiciously and when and where the crop can best utilize it. So if a good weed is a dead weed, an even better weed is one that never happened at all. When a farmer does everything they can to keep weeds from emerging, fewer resources are needed to fight in-season weeds, and the organic system is primed for success. Despite best efforts though, weeds will always find a way. When they do eventually break their seed coats and those thirsty roots start looking for a cash crop to compete with, then you need to make sure you have the tools and techniques to make them wish that they just hadn't. See you in the next lesson.